Well, so hello, yeah, I'm Fergus. I'm from East London, so unlike Diana, I am not a local, and I'm also from a national charity which is called Hope for the Future. We're a climate and nature charity that works specifically on trying to encourage people to meet up with their politicians, to have conversations and dialogue about the climate and nature issues that they really care about. And we do that because we kind of think this is maybe an under-tapped resource, that even though, I suppose, in this country we have a democratic system, lots of people perhaps don't feel like it's for them, or don't feel like they know how to use it, don't feel perhaps that it would go that well. Maybe could I do a show of hands at this point? How many people would have said they've met with a politician in their life? Okay, so quite a good amount. And then of those people, how many was an MP? How many was a councillor? Brilliant. Two prime ministers? That's pretty impressive. Ah, there we go. Fantastic. Well, that's the kind of high-level influence we would aim for. That's amazing, and great to hear. But this is the kind of thing we try and encourage, I suppose. And so I suppose if I talk about politicians in here, we can imagine that it can either mean a councillor or an MP, or we work across the country. So some people have mayors, some people have MSs, or sort of politicians from devolved administrations. So Hope for the Future has been around for over 10 years now, and we've always been working in a similar sort of space, I suppose. And in that time, we've developed some sort of thoughts, intuitions and theories about what goes well when we're speaking to our politicians, perhaps why people feel that it's not for them and how we can work on that. So this is the kind of thing we do, I suppose, and it's the kind of support that we'd like to offer to you as part of this. So maybe I'll talk through a couple of examples of how we've worked in this space, and these are all taken from over the last year. So has anyone heard, I think, of the Stop Rosebank campaign? Can I get a show of hands again? The Stop Rosebank campaign? One hand. Don't have to have heard of it. It's not.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, Stop Rosebank campaign. Okay,
so to stop the new oil field license that was granted in the North Sea by the previous administration.
Fantastic. Yes, so yes, Rosebank's a big oil field, which is it's a question mark over whether it's going to be allowed to be tapped in the coming years. So there's this big campaign called the Stop Rosebank campaign. And Hope for the Future have been working with this campaign for quite a while now. And one of the ways in which we work with them is by training their, I suppose you might say supporters, or you might say campaigners, on here's how you can have a really good conversation with your MP about Rosebank. Here's how you can work to sort of address some of the anxieties they might have, to have a real dialogue with them and be in that space. And we've been doing that, I think, over the last year. That's been quite interesting. It's all about getting out into these communities and encouraging people to meet up with their MPs. And out of that, a lot of change has happened, which I think is the key thing here. So I think from that, we've had between 15 and 20 MPs have now spoken really positively about wanting to oppose the Rosebank oil field. MPs who hadn't previously spoken out on that. And I think this is something that MPs often mention, is that even though they might think, okay, lots of their constituents maybe do care about climate change, no one is really going to speak to them about these issues. So they kind of feel that when they're standing up in Parliament, they maybe don't have the backing of their communities or their constituencies, the people who elected them. So this is one thing you can do when you're going to speak to a politician. You're kind of giving them that mandate, perhaps, to feel comfortable that they can go out and speak to politicians. So that's one example of the way in which this type of change can happen, and we're beginning to see that. And there's a couple of things there. So that's lots of people, I suppose, working across the country, and they're working in concert. So MPs might be hearing from lots of different of their constituents, or they might be hearing perhaps from their neighbouring constituency or their colleagues in their party that other MPs are also hearing people speak to them. There's other models in which you can work this, I suppose, relationship building process between ourselves and our politicians. So another thing we've been working on recently, has anyone heard of Sarah Jones MP? She's a minor minister right now in the government. I don't know anyone would, although in my head Croydon isn't too far from here, and she's a Croydon MP. But again, I'm from East London, so we've been working with a group in her constituency, and they've been meeting with her over the last 5 years. So from when Labour was in opposition all the way into government, and over that time they've built a relationship with her. And when they first started meeting, perhaps there was a degree of distrust on both sides. People were anxious. But then over the time, they managed to really build up that relationship and build a really strong, and I suppose, a relationship that's based in trust, which is something that I hope for the future we try and work on quite a lot. We sometimes talk about using this theory of common ground. And what that means is we want to encourage people to think about themselves as working with their politicians. Perhaps we might see in the media that there's a lot of, I suppose, tension in how we interact with MPs. Perhaps if the main way One of the ways we might see people interact with politicians is something like question time, which is often quite adversarial. There's a tension there, and we try and work to, I suppose, to overcome that, to find those ways in which, where it's possible, and it's not always possible, where we can emphasise wanting to work together with our politicians. That's what the group with Sarah Jones did. And they got loads of things out of that. So Sarah Jones ended up, again, supporting the Stop Rosebank campaign, supporting a couple of other campaigns. MPs can also write to government ministers and use their powers within Parliament to raise awareness. They asked her to write blogs on issues that they had brought to her. And they also asked her to convene other people in a similar space who she's working with. So through them, they also got to meet with their local council. They got to meet with representatives from Thames Water to discuss water pollution locally. And they also set up various different links and encouraged her to push her to be more ambitious. So that's, I think, another example of how, even though we might think, okay, we can't go speak to politicians, actually in that example, Sarah Jones benefited greatly from having this group and would often say, you guys have really given me a lot in terms of what I can then take forward. So we shouldn't think about it as just a one-way thing. We can also help our politicians, and often they'll be really, really grateful. Just to talk about maybe one more example, and then we can move on to questions. We've also been working with a group called Fossil Free West Yorkshire. So instead of doing MPs, they work on a council level thing. And for the last 3 years, they've been campaigning to get their council to remove investments in fossil fuels from their pensions, which in the climate movement is something people often talk about. It's called divestment. It's about making sure that any money that we personally are going to get is going to be invested in something which really supports our future. And they've taken an interesting tack to that council, where they've been slowly building up, bit by bit, lots of different relationships. There's a really great activist from that group who's called Jane, and she said that what we've been doing is practicing polite perseverance, where we might sometimes not hear anything, and it can be a really long work, but what we're doing is going there and staying there and saying, we're going to be around, we're going to keep asking you these questions, and we're going to keep trying to work with you and bring you around. So it's kind of a process that's based on trying to convince people in a way, as opposed to working against each other. And that's been really great, really successful. And I think that they're quite close to actually getting a win there. So that's another example where you really put in the time over a long point. So I guess what I wanted to say, this is one way in which we can make change. We can perhaps take any recommendations that come out of this, and we can take that to our policy makers, and we can begin to make change on that. And I think it fits in really nicely with the kind of work that Diana does, which we might call community organizing or consciousness raising, getting people to think about things. We can be doing that, and we can also be making sure that we're engaging with our politicians, perhaps inviting them to any events that we're putting on locally, if we're putting on climate events, thinking about how we can integrate them into different things, so that as a society we can begin to kind of heal those divides a bit and begin to work together towards a sort of future that we can all be happy with. To me, we'll go to questions.
Thank you, Fergus and Diana.